Ladies and gentlemen, it's 9:30 on December 2022, and this is the regular scheduled meeting of the Nevada Taxicab Authority Board. Madam Secretary, are we on the record?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. I will call us to order, and the record should reflect that members Decker, Soderberg, and Reeser are present. Also, the administrator is present. And Member Decker, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Secretary, has this agenda and meeting been posted in accordance with the open meeting law?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Our first item of business will be to take public comment. This is time set aside pursuant to that revised statute for the board to receive comment from members of the public on matters within our jurisdiction. No action may be taken on these matters, but we would more than welcome any member of the public who would wish to present this comment. Is there any member of the public present in the room who would like to address? Seeing none, is there any member of the public online who wishes to make comment? Thank you. Accordingly, I will close public comment and we will go to agenda item 3, which is industry discussion. The first item agendized today is a discussion on Las Vegas parking enforcement, specifically at the Circa Resort Casino in the Fremont area.
You have the floor.
Thank you. So,
Good morning.
good morning.
Would you state your name and
Yep.
representation?
I'm Maria Soto, Parking Services Administrator, City of Las Vegas Parking Services. So we were asked to come and do just a little update and small presentation on taxi services in downtown Las Vegas. So I did bring a handout in regards to what we've discussed previously with some of the members. So we do have an active loading and taxi zone, which is down in front of the Union Plaza on Main Street. We do have curb management in place down there. It is extremely busy down there in the evenings, especially on the weekends. So we have kiosks displayed along that area. And they do have a timer on them. It has a countdown. It has a notification of when you get into violation mode. If you're sitting there too long, that's to assist with the flow of traffic down there with the taxis that do come. We do have advertising on the river side of it. The taxi kiosks do display the violations. We also have no parking for taxi only all the way down that area so that the taxis can get in there. Our kiosks are very effective in managing the zone. But what happens leading up to that zone is the box in front of the Union Plaza. Union Plaza has closed down their Circle Drive where previously taxis and different POVs could go in and drop off. And I think they're doing construction down there and open that up to some sort of a bar and event space. So the light will change, the cars will start to go, it'll turn red and everyone wants to make that light. And then they end up stopping in the red zone or in the box, which is the intersection, blocking it. And then customers begin to either unload or load there. It is a safety hazard. It is a violation. And a lot of them have gotten citations, including Uber and Lyfts and POVs that stop in the middle of the box. There's a lot going on down there. So if you look at the third page, we did some pictures in there of the area, the ALU zone for the taxis, the front of the Union Plaza. We've got, what Main Street looks like there. So it's closed. The motor lobby's closed. There's a bus stop there. And then the biggest thing is the garage exit from the Garage Mahal. So that is an enter and exit only on Main Street. There's no other way to get in and out of that garage currently. There are plans for future build to have some access on the back side of it. but that is a ways away. So the problem is all of that dumps out. They have to make a right turn. They're forced to go all the way down Main to Bridger. So that adds more traffic to that area. We've got the Golden Gate down there and obviously all the Fremont Experience stuff going on. So there is a lot of backup there. So how we solve this is we've staffed it. We have enforcement officers out there Thursday through Sunday from 5:30 to about 2 o'clock in the morning to help keep people moving through that area and to free it up for the taxis to be able to get into the curb. And then dedicated officer down there, and it pretty much is self-sufficient financially down there with what we have. So we have had several taxi drivers be cited down there. And I think that was some of the concerns that they have gone to legal, and we met with legal and discussed and showed pictures of what's happening down there. So we want to help taxis down there. We need taxis down there, you know, to support the various hotels down there. So we're trying to do whatever we can to assist them with that and just let the industry know that we know we have TNCs down there too. We try to keep them in their place as best we can. But it is fairly done to anyone that gets stopped down there and gets cited. So we are not targeting any TNCs. We're not targeting taxis or anyone. We're just trying to keep the flow of traffic safe and people not getting dumped out in the street. And we're here to help. So if anyone has questions, yes,
Any questions?
No questions. No questions.
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Anything further on that matter?
Other than the fact that since the new taxi zones have been put in place in front of the plaza, I had an opportunity to go down there, check the area and see what's happening. One of the problems that existed was that taxi drivers were blocking the Circa parking lot, and that was a problem in terms of Friday and Saturday nights, in terms of like between 3,000 and 5,000 people try to come out of that parking lot at night. So to a certain extent, the reason why I asked for this presentation was that since they have attempted to ameliorate the problem, I wanted to let the industry know that it will not just be City of Las Vegas enforcement that will be dealing with this issue. We will also start dealing with this issue, but I wanted to give notification to the industry that we have a solution to the problem, and that if drivers don't want to follow those procedures, then there will be enforcement in those areas, probably all during the times in which there will also be City of Las Vegas enforcement in that area. So that's just the reason why I put the matter on the agenda for this meeting.
Is it POVs or is it taxis and Uber lifts that are following the?
This situation is something that both Uber and Lyft, they have places for Uber and Lyft to unload, as well as taxis to unload.
No, I understand that, but who's not following the rules? Is it POVs or is it industry?
Industry in certain situations, and there are also Uber and Lyft that may be issues too, but we're going to solve the issue relative to taxi cabs.
George, if you state your name.
George Balaban with Desert Cab Company. So again, for why this is a concern to us is because we're trying to retain drivers. We are trying to provide service downtown, but the drivers are frustrated because when they get into those situations where they're in traffic is stopped, it's a red light, passengers are in their car, they see Uber cars in front of them, the private vehicles. We don't know whether it's an Uber or Lyft. They see cars in front of them and people are unloading in front of them. The passengers in the cab are going to get out. And the cab driver can't stop them, but the cab driver gets cited for unloading in traffic. And the cab driver's like, if I lock the doors, I'm in trouble because I won't let them out. They get out and I get a citation. And nobody wants to hear anything about it. You're getting a ticket. It's like, so if we continue to do that, and that can't not enforce the law, they're not going to have service downtown. That's just the reality of it. So the drivers continually see the cab drivers treated this way and nobody else is. Now, I know Maria said that they've cited some POVs and some Ubers and Lyfts, not anywhere near like they cite cab drivers. And it's, again, that is not your guys' responsibility. You can't make them write tickets to the other side, but it seems so one-sided
that it is very disheartening to the cab drivers. And we've met with the city downtown. I'm not exaggerating. We get at our cab company a ticket a day that's mailed to us from the camera that catches the cab that is at the back of the cab line. He's pulled on with passengers because the cab in front is loaded and pulling off. And while that car is pulling off and he's trying to get on, the passengers are trying to get out of the car before he's completely in there. And a citation is written. It's written from a tick, and they'll send you the picture. The people are getting out of the car, and the tail end of the cab is, outside, not blocking the lane, but it's in the lane, and a citation will be written. And we get them over and over and over and over. And it truly is a problem. The cab drivers begrudgingly pay it, but there's just nothing else we can do. And the end result, again, I think is just going to be that cab drivers are going to eventually just refuse to go down there because there's just so many citations that are written. I don't know necessarily what the solution is, but just laying the law down and writing tickets to every time a cab driver doesn't do something right is not going to solve the problem. It's going to just, it will solve the problem. There'll just be no taxi cabs down there.
If is there a different queuing, like a temporary stoplight or something like that that would change this? Is there some different way to queue?
I honestly, I wish I had the solution because I would share it. This never used to be this bad. It's this bad because there is, in my opinion, no enforcement against Uber and Lyft. And again, I call it Uber and Lyft, but it could just be me dropping off my friends. The people that are not in a taxi cab or a limousine literally can stop anywhere they want and unload traffic and nothing happens to them. A police car could be sitting behind them and the police car will just flash its light. Like, don't do that, because they don't want to write a ticket to a citizen. But if it's a cab, that's a whole different deal. You're getting a ticket. So that causes people to unload anywhere and everywhere, and the cabs are then stuck in this mess, and their passengers want out. And I don't know how we stop them from getting out. And so again, I don't.
I think one of the solutions, George, in terms of this Carl Armstrong administrator, one of the solutions that we have is that what we have to also work toward is having more taxi operations and stands downtown, so that they maybe expand what they're doing at the plaza in terms of adding more in terms of what we're talking about. But we need to look at solutions so that we don't create congestion with our taxi cabs as well as the other. I will talk to the NTA in terms of dealing with Uber and Lyft. I will have that discussion with them in terms of that issue that we're talking about. I can't stop the customer people that do what they do, but I am fully invested in trying to resolve this issue between the city, Uber and Lyft, and everyone like that. But at the same time, we also, our industry is regulated. And to a certain extent, we need to do what we can in order to make sure that our people stay within the law in terms of what has to happen. But we also need to find a permanent solution to what's going on. Part of the problem, like you said before, is that there's construction also going on in that area, which also causes a problem probably with these stands. Those are the things that we have to look into, and those are the things that we have to deal with in order to try to make this better. We don't want a situation in which there's no taxi cabs going downtown, because we need that area serviced.
I don't disagree, and having more cab stands surely will help. I just hope that the Taxicab Authority, Metro already writes tickets to cab drivers, parking enforcement already writes tickets to cab drivers downtown, to now have the TA on top of it to go down there to make sure that our industry is obeying the rules. Just sounds like a lot to me. I'm just hoping the Taxicab Authority, again, looks at the situation, and if a TA officer sees a passenger's getting out of a taxi cab and he's surrounded by other cars with people getting out of them, and they write just a ticket to him, to have some consideration to say, This isn't on the cab driver. Nobody else got a ticket. I don't know why the cab driver needs to get a ticket. That didn't teach him any type of lesson other than it's unfair. So I just hope that because that's going to drive people out of the industry. If you're a cab driver, you're going to say, if I'm going to come service down here, I'm going to come service in my private car. I'm not going to do it in a taxi cab because I can do it in my private car and I get a ticket. So we just need to be aware of that. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Mr. Bellman. Mr. Bellman, so I understand it, this is largely photo enforcement?
Yes,
So when a non-taxi cab vehicle lets somebody out illegally there's somebody making the decision to not cite that car? I'm seeing a no from the city person over there. But what you're saying is that if I take my car now and drop off Member Decker and I do it illegally, what you're saying is I probably won't get a ticket, but the cab
Is that where the photo enforcement is on a cab line stand. So if you were going down there, drop off JD, you would probably not pull into that cab line. You'd pull past that and just double park next to it and unload and you wouldn't get a ticket.
I understand.
It's the guy getting on the tail of the line. That camera was not where you would
Okay.
pull, but a cab does. And that's where he gets the ticket.
Okay, and my second question is unrelated to that, and it kind of occurred to me when we discussed this a few meetings ago. Where is the management of the plaza in this?
Nowhere.
Yeah, they designed this. Has anybody brought them to the table? It's
Well,
kind
the
of,
city decided. Mario Locacho, general manager of Deluxe. I brought this up to Kimberly like a year and a half ago.
okay,
Almost 2 years when the Circa opened. And I brought it up, and to answer the first question, I've had drivers where the tire is on the white, and the parking enforcement gave him a ticket, and the camera gave him a ticket. And I saved them all. I have stacks as I started.
two
educating-
tickets for the same violation?
Correct. So the option for that driver was to go down and argue it, and which is like, well, 75 and 100, 175. By the time I argue, I'm still stuck with the 100.
Yeah.
Well, what's the purpose? So he ate the 75. But the whole issue here is you have construction. And as George says, all the people around dropping off and people follow the, like almost like a goat reaction, a sheep reaction. Hey, they're doing it, and they all get out. And
Understand that.
to add to what George said, when you add the airport gives tickets, state troopers give tickets. These guys have nowhere, they're pretty much working for tickets. That said, well, they should be educated. No, because a lot of them, and I ain't gonna say where, they don't even have any reaction. You say something, they give you 30 days. You're out. And me and Carl have discussed this. The airport is the worst, but when you add them all together and inflation is just going up, these guys are making less and less. We're going to be out of drivers everywhere. As far as the industry is going to be in trouble.
I understand that. It's not a super lucrative job.
And now
To
if
begin with.
you put that on Main Street and you add the TA now giving tickets to these drivers, it's not going to be a good deal. I mean, it's really bad.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So has there been the dedicated officer that Maria mentioned? Is that traffic control or is that enforcement running
Well,
citations?
I don't know. I
Oh.
think it's the guy in the scooter he probably belongs to parking. He probably belongs to parking. He has that three-wheeler on a white scooter.
Just
Maria
mention
Soto,
your name.
City of Las Vegas Parking Services Administrator. So the enforcement officer is a traffic enforcement officer that is down there. We don't do double tickets and there's not photo enforcement because that's illegal in Nevada. It's the actually enforcement officer that takes a picture of the license plate. Typically, when they're down there, they will flash their light first to tell the person to move on, to give them an opportunity to leave. And when they don't, that's when they go. They will try to give the ticket to them, but if they drive off before they can get up to the car, then they're gonna do a drive-away ticket. But we try to focus on handing it to the person, obviously, as much as possible.
Did
But
I
it's difficult.
misunderstand? You're saying there's no cameras? Because Fremont and Maine has a camera.
They have cameras, but they can't do
Oh, no, no,
enforcement,
no, no.
photos and
They-
tickets.
Those are tickets.
Yeah,
I have a whole stack of them.
we get them in the mail.
Who do you get them from?
2 years ago, like I said, a year and a half ago, I brought this up to Kimberly that it's illegal. And I have a whole stack that I could give the city to give us all these drivers back. So in the white lanes on Fremont and Maine, all those white stripes,
Yeah, that's
And then
the
there's,
box.
then there's another little box past that.
Mhm.
There's cameras all over, a 4 angle. If the tire is anywhere in those lines, you pay $100.
There's no photo enforcement. It's an officer that's down there taking pictures with his phone
Ugh,
that are attached to the ticket.
That's
Because
incorrect.
that's not from
That's
City
incorrect.
of Las Vegas
That's
Parking
incorrect.
Services, I can tell you that.
Well, I can bring the
So
challenge
I'd
to
be
you.
happy to meet with you, absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
Yeah.
No, it's not arguing, it's
Here.
incorrect.
No.
I have,
And I think that what we need to do is to look into what is being alleged and find out exactly what's happening. So I will set up a meeting with Kimberly and the city attorney and have this discussion. I thought we had resolved the situation, but maybe we have not, and therefore maybe another talk needs to take place.
Carl, I archive everything, so if anything needs to come out of my back room, I have it all in documentation.
I may have to visit your place and have a discussion with you too.
No problem.
Okay.
The other thing, Administrator, Las Vegas, downtown Las Vegas with the new property, especially the new property coming online, but with other expansions down there. I don't know that this is a short-term problem.
It is not.
And so I also would offer to assist you if we need to interface with the State Gaming Control Board to perhaps get them to talk to the operators about the need to cooperate with providing alternatives.
That may be
For
something that we
instance,
may have to do.
yeah, for instance, cap stands, they should
Additional cap
cooperate with cap
stands.
stands. Yeah. Because they're not going to like it if their patrons can't get a cab either.
Right. So all of us have to be at the table in order for us to come to a long-term solution.
And I don't know if I'm not of the view that it all goes away when the construction ends.
Probably not, because I think that we have a chronic shortage of cab stands in the downtown Las Vegas area, and as such, it creates a bottleneck. We have to resolve it in one way or another.
When you go to court, it takes a hike to get to a cab.
Yes.
Anything else on this agenda item? Anybody else wish to address it? Anybody online want to address this on this?
Question.
Yes.
Does the city of Las Vegas parking enforcement, since this has been happening as observed by industry for the last couple of years?
Ms.
Can you-
Martinez, you do not have a basis to ask questions unless you're going to come over here and make a public comment.
Oh, okay. Then I'll wait for public comment.
Okay. We'll move on to the next agenda item if there's no other comments, and that's discussion on Taxicab Authority policies number 311 and 312. Administrator, did you?
I guess I'll tee it up. The reason why policies 311 and 312 were created were, we have a one permit per person policy that has existed since time immemorial. We're running into some issues as to bleed over between employee and lease situations. One of the concerns I have is that I need to know who you're driving for and when you're driving it, whether you're driving on a lease or whether you're driving on an employee situation. And that is the reason why policies 311 and 312 were put into place, so that we get referrals specifically from a particular company so that we know in terms of the permit who exactly they're driving for. I have given dispensations as of this point in terms of companies that have multiple parts like YCS, Lucky, Western, Nellis, things of that nature, in terms of those individuals that they can drive a cab for entities that they control in terms of that kind of situation. So that is a dispensation in terms of their permit will allow them to do that. But other than that, one of the problems we have sometimes with lease is that one employer may not know that someone is leasing from another employer because there is no notice requirement that exists that employers are told that you're driving for more than one. And that causes a situation, that causes a problem. We're still looking into the problem of something that was brought to my attention by Lucky Cab in terms of the issue of a driver, for example, that is working part-time, but wants to work part-time for more than one entity. We have to work through that process, but there is only one permit per person, and we need to know at all times as to who they're driving for. And that is the reason why policies 311 and 312 were created. But I am open, based on whatever discussion takes place here, to revise those policies in order to try to make it more palatable to the industry. But at the same time, I'm concerned about wage and hour, overtime. I'm also concerned about a driver possibly being on the road more than 10 hours a day, which is per statute that they cannot be. But if you have, for example, two contracts at the same time, a person technically, legally, if you try to do that, there'll be a conflict with statute in terms of you possibly could be on the road for 20 hours a particular day. What happens when you have an accident, for example, in the 18th hour, which is in violation of statute at that particular point? Who exactly is responsible? Is it this company or that company? So I was looking at it in terms of a liability situation, in terms that exists as to who would ultimately be responsible for that, and making a situation so that people don't inadvertently violate the other parts of the statute. That was the reason why 311 and 312 were created, and also to clarify licensing processes for drivers, so they know, so we know exactly who they're driving for and what time they're driving for that particular individual. That's the reason for the policies.
Board member questions?
I would say in the last legislative session, a bill was proposed to require the Department of Motor Vehicles to allow its professional licensees to utilize their professional license at multiple employers. It failed because that already exists and we already do allow that. As long as they register with the department, we know where they're working. They're working at one of the places that they've registered with, and we can easily find that out. We don't have the liability of being behind the wheel and all that kind of stuff that you do, but I know that that is a trend, let's just say, in the regulatory environment to allow licensees to work for multiple employers.
I know we'll have other. So before, I have one question before there, no, you can come up. So I want to understand the one permit per person policy, since it existed before I got here. If I'm driving for a lease vehicle.
Right.
Is
The permit says lease and the company that you're leasing from.
okay. And if I'm an employee, it says.
It says employee and the company in which you're leasing from. Every driver that comes before us also has to have a letter of referral from the company that they're driving for. That's what we're trying to do with.
So if I were leasing from one company and driving as an employee for the other, I'm assuming my lease vehicle would have my lease permit in it. If
we would not be giving you more than one permit, that would be the problem. The problem would be that
I couldn't get that second.
You would not be able to get, because it's one permit per person.
So if I'm doing it today, I'm putting my employee permit in that leased vehicle.
That's correct.
So if I were pulled over,
that would possibly be a violation.
Yeah.
But if you're an employee, you're not leasing a cab, is there a reason why allowing someone to utilize their permit at two different companies would be prohibited?
The concern that exists in terms of whether or not what would happen in that kind of situation is that there's a question of liability. There's also a question of whether we violate the 10-hour rule in terms of someone driving. Because the bottom line also, the issue is that, let's say, for example, you're an employee driver and you exhausted your 40 hours per week. Then you want to go, let's say if on Saturday and Sunday, you want to go to be a lease driver for someone else relative to those timeframes. If it's for that same company, we may be violating wage and hour, we may be violating overtime requirements. We also may be in a situation in which we inadvertently create a situation in which a person drives over 10 hours per day, which is per statute not allowed. That's the issue that we have at this particular point.
Well, when you say we, I don't know what you mean, because it's not the agency and it's not the board that creates any situation. It's industry and the driver. But I think that if we're prohibiting this entire operational issue for this tiny little risk that we want to make sure that we've addressed, that may be overkill. I'm not sure. I think maybe the agency ought to take a look at before the legislature does, because that is a trend legislatively and all it takes is someone to go to the legislature. Well, I don't know whether it's better for the drivers or better for industry, but they both have lobbyists, and if one lobbyist goes to the legislature, the legislature says, hey, the agency's prohibiting this, and we'd like to, you're not going to be able to craft that bill. So it might be something to look at if there's a demand for it on the driver's side or on the industry side. I would suggest the agency address it before it's out of your hands. I guess that's my point.
Who's rushed? Miss
Yeah. George Balvin with Desert Cab Company. Cab drivers are exempt from overtime. That doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about that. They're exempt. I don't know where 10 hours came from. Cab driver is 12 hours, unless they're on a charter. It can be more than 12 hours. We do have the 70-hour DOT. That's a 70-hour week. So I don't know where the 40-hour week came from. And none of that applies. And those are all my standards. I don't think they're Taxicab Authority standards other than the 12-hour standard.
12 hours of standard.
So a cab driver that did work as an employee for 3 or 4 days, 5 days, can come lease an extra day if he's not going over the 70 hours. So I don't know what this is trying to accomplish. We have cab drivers within my company that are part-time drivers that want to be employees because they want the benefits of being an employee. So they work enough shifts to be an employee, but they want the flexibility to be able to know, rather than working on an extra day because they want some money, if they're going to work an extra day, they're required to work the schedule that I'm going to put them if they're an employee. But if they want to lease, they have the flexibility of whatever hours they want to work.
Don't
So-
they also have the flexibility to use the vehicle for
Personal use.
personal use and for
Yes.
work for Uber?
Yeah.
I-
Whether that actually happens with Uber and Lyft is a whole nother thing,
Right,
but
yeah.
yes, correct.
But I asked that question, Mr. Balaban, looking perhaps forward to a time when there's more exchange, if you believe some of the
Yeah, and I would believe that is
information in the
true.
public.
That Uber's running out of drivers, that is a possibility. So again, within my own company, having a driver being a Desert Cab employee and leasing from Desert Cab, this new regulation doesn't allow that. And I really don't understand why that would be. I'm watching everything that he's doing. So I definitely don't think that is good. If in fact we do implement something like this, that driver that drives for me part-time, that cannot lease for me part-time, is going to go drive part-time. He just won't be driving for me. He's going to drive for Uber or for Lyft or a Gypsy and the whole idea is that we're trying to get the cabs, we're trying to get the rides into cabs for the excise tax, for the TA trip charge, and for the health of our industry. So I think it would be bad for the industry to push them to have to go do it somewhere else. And again, the whole thing with the hours, I mean, can't somebody be working full-time at Caesar's Palace as a dealer and come drive a cab for me? So, I mean, he's working way more hours. Maybe it's not behind the wheel. I think the TA is trying to get into something that is going to be very hard for them to administer, and this is not the way to administer it. I brought a couple of things because I would think the concerns that you should have, which are the safety ones, are about the safety of the vehicle and the safety of the drivers.
I didn't make it
Actually,
up.
mine's the safety of the traveling
Public.
public.
And sorry, sorry to interrupt, but those safety concerns exist in law already. We don't have to create new laws that.
Right. And when I said the safety of the driver, I meant that the driver's being safe.
Right.
To the
I
public.
wasn't criticizing, I was just,
Um,
somebody listening might not
sorry.
appreciate that.
So with our DT5 meters that are in our cars, so that just real quickly is that's just one page because it'd be many pages long. We have a DT5 meter.
Is this a confidential document?
No, it is not. So each day when we come in to work, we are going to run a report in our meter. And this is just from a day from 2 days ago that is going to show you, and it's just one of the pages. If you look at the very top, this is this driver. This is up for our lease company. This driver, LMAU, he drove 9.45 and 2.2 hours. This is in one shift. The next person down below him logged in and out of his meter. So those ones that have the arrows, he worked, took a break, and then worked again. So a bunch of people that are below that, you'll see they're just working one time. So we can pull this report, and we do each day, export it into Excel, sort it, and it will show us if anybody worked over 12 hours for our lease drivers. So that's how we will look at that. And there are occasions where a driver has logged in, logged out, and logged back in, and actually has gone over 12 hours. We will see that. We will call that lease driver in and tell him, again, about the rules of the 12 hours. And there are going to be occasions where he's on a charter, which allows him to go over 12 hours because the trip, we could look at the trip sheet. So when we call him and tell him you exceeded the 12 hours, he's like, yeah, I exceeded the 12 hours. You had to come tow me in. I was broke down, Jim. Oh yeah, okay. So there can be some reasons that it does happen. But we have a way to look at this, and we do this each and every day, and it's very, very simple. If you had to look through every page and look for this would be hard, but since you can just export it and sort it, you got all the people that are over 12 hours at the top. You can really quickly eliminate, oh, that car broke down. You can look at his electronic trip sheet, see he was on a charter, and you can find the people who actually did something they shouldn't have done, and you can counsel them. So there's a very simple way for us to, on a daily basis, see whether a driver is working over 12 hours, whether he's an employee or whether he's a lease driver. So we feel we have a good read on that, on the 12 hours. The 70 hours is a little bit harder. If it's within my own company, whether he's an employee and leasing from me, it's easy because I can just, again, do this. I can't if he's an employee for Cheryl 5 days a week, and I don't know how many hours he worked, and he comes and leases from me. But I don't believe that the Taxicab Authority has the authority to say he can't come be an independent contractor from me. When they come lease from me, because we offer leases that are not week-long leases, we have day leases, we have multiple day leases, 3-4 day leases, 6 day leases. We tell them right within our lease contract that what the rules are about 70 hours a week, that they can't be doing any of this. So they are signing this lease and agreeing to it, telling us that they aren't working someplace else, that they're going to exceed these hours. And that's, again, how we feel that we're comfortable liability-wise doing all this. So I think that we're doing that. So again, I believe that creating this new rule is just bad for the industry if we're trying to get drivers to stay in the industry and we're trying to accommodate putting out as many shifts as we can put out. Because I think we have a pretty good way to track the safety of them not working over the hours.
And my concern, Mr. Chair, would be that we're limiting the ability of drivers to have options in making a living for a risk or a concern that's addressed elsewhere in law already. And that would be my concern. In an environment in which everybody else other than cab drivers does have options. Yeah.
And just because we're on the whole subject of the safety, I brought this as well because I know that this has come up. Sorry for the reach again. So The other part of the safety is, of course, the safety of the vehicle, right? The whole inspection. And we already have a TA reg that says the cars have to be inspected every day. So what we created, Captain created for us is that, so whether it's an employee vehicle, if it's an employee vehicle, of course, it's coming back to our yard every day and switching drivers. So we're seeing the cars. The lease ones don't. They're going to leave. A person leases the car, whether it's a team or an individual, and he can take the car home. Yet because of the TA regulations, we have them come to the yard each and every day. So that first page kind of is just one page showing you the cars. And when the car pulls into the yard, that's a lease car.
Yep.
We have the availability to, we have someone who can inspect it, and there'll be the person's name that's inspecting the car, whether it's inspected in the shop or at the podium. And the podium is kind of like where the person that assigns cars stands. So that person can be doing the inspection.
That's Danny DeVito.
Yes, exactly. If you've been watching TV long enough, that's exactly right. The person that's assigning the cars. So there's a lot attendant who's going to put his name in, or a lot of times they'll send it into the garage and it marked as a shop. The second little packet I sent to you is that those drivers then have a tablet or on their phone, and they can pull up, not the driver, I'm sorry, the inspector can pull up this on his screen and pick what kind of inspection he's going to do of the car. And then it has, you hit the front page, which tells you what you want, the daily inspection, and then we'll give you the things to check on the car so that the person that's inspecting doesn't have to remember what to inspect. And he just checks each of those things. And then that's saved. So we have that for a TA audit or to prove that we're inspecting the cars. So that is the other way that we're inspecting the safety of the vehicle on leased vehicles on a regular basis. So again, I think that we have good systems for keeping the cars safe, the driver safe for the hours, vehicle safety through these inspections. So I don't believe that having to do this change is really necessary. When the cab gets, the way it was done before was that a driver who drove for me, that was an employee, decided he wanted to go lease. He didn't even have to tell the taxicab authority where he's going to go lease. He would just go down and tell the taxicab authority, I'm an employee at Desert Cab. I don't know if I'm going to stay an employee, but I want to become an independent contractor as well. And he would get an independent contractor sticker that he gets put onto his existing permit that says he is an employee at Desert Cab, but he also has an independent contractor sticker, which will allow him to lease. If he gets pulled over in a car, he's going to have his permit and it's going to say independent contractor on it. He could be in my Desert Cab and he could be acting as an employee. The medallion on the outside of the car is a non-lease medallion. He's in a Desert Cab. His TA card says Desert Cab. Everything's okay. He has a lease medallion on the outside of his car and he's driving a Whittlesey and it says Desert Cab on his TA permit, but it says independent contractor. He should have on his phone or a hard copy, a copy of the lease with Whittlesey that has his name on it, the cab number on it. So that there already is a document that ties him to that car that it doesn't need to say it on his permit. It just says he has the right to lease. So we have a system that has been working for multiple years already. It's not like they and it's going, well, your TA card says Desert. So, okay, well, but here's my lease paperwork that says it says Desert on the TA card, but it says I'm an independent contractor. And here's my lease contract that shows you I'm leasing from Whittlesey. That's the car I'm in, and it has a lease medallion on it. And the lease medallion number matches the paperwork. His name matches it. His TA permit number matches it. So we already have a system. So I don't think that we're trying to fix something I don't think is broken. My opinion. Questions?
Mr. Administrator, do we have any issues with enforcement that you would throw in that we're addressing with this?
The only concern I would have at this particular point is knowing at any one particular time who you're driving for. Usually, we make that determination based upon who is on the permit at that particular point. That would be what the enforcement officer would look at in terms of making a determination as to whether or not the person is in compliance or not in compliance. At this particular point, let's say, for example, you find that someone is an employee of Yellow Cab, then that would be the person that you would presume they're driving for based upon what the car shows in terms of whether it's on the lease medallion or whether it's on a employee medallion. We're just saying if you're an employee, you're an employee. If you're a leaser, you're a leaser. You're not moving back and forth in terms of vote. That's basically what we're doing, so that we have some way of knowing, and our enforcement staff has some way of knowing exactly who you're working for at any particular time.
I guess my question is, are we currently finding that that the agency is unable to do that?
We're finding that that is problematic in certain situations in terms of the question. It causes a question in terms of the enforcement staff as to what action they should take relative to what category the individual is in when they're making a stop.
No questions.
I have a couple questions. So same question for Mr. Balaban and for the administrator. Could there not be issued to the same John Doe a license for the lease, and to that same John Doe, when he's as an employee, a license to be an employee? I mean, couldn't there be two separate documents? When he's in his lease vehicle, he has his lease license, and I get the decal. I see some, I'll frame my issue there. I'd be more comfortable if I gave him the license and up front, when I gave him the decal, I looked at the lease and saw what company it was with, and that was actually on this permit, because then I'd know if he got pulled over in a leased vehicle, oh, he's with Whittlesey as a lease driver, and he's got the right permit. And if I have problems with the way he's driving or the maintenance of the vehicle, I know Whittlesey is the lessor. So I now have both the driver and the company, and I'm good to go. And then that employee finishes his lease work on Saturday and Sunday. On Monday through Wednesday, he works for you. And those times he has a permit in his cab for an employee. And I see he's with you and he's an employee and he's got his permit. I'm just wondering why that's not possible. And I will give you the example I'm thinking of. If I'm a casino employee, I can work Saturday and Sunday at the Wynn with this employee permit, and I can take that Monday through Wednesday and work at MGM. I'm not prevented from working unless the company says I can. I can use that work permit both places, and both places have a record of, well, he's a 21 dealer at the Wynn, and he's a Baccarat dealer over at the MGM. I mean, so I'm just trying to wonder, and the state of California and the state of Nevada do not have a problem finding me when I'm practicing in their respective states. So I'm just wondering why that couldn't be.
So for us, if there were two separate TA cards, from where I'm standing, I don't know why they couldn't do that. For me, I would think that that is just leading to the driver having to manage two TA cards.
Okay.
So I like the sticker idea better, because the idea, when you pull the car over, you know what the company is. It says it it's on the side of the car. And you also know when you pull the car over, whether it is an employee car or a lease car, because the medallion says right on it. So you already know when you pull it over that this is a desert cab, and it's a desert cab lease car. So now that's solved. Now, when you get the driver inside the car and you ask him, I need to see your lease contract, the lease contract is going to better have George Balaban's name on it, better have that medallion's name on it, and desert cab on it, and my TA permit number on it. And by the way, hand me your permit. and then I'm going to hand to the permit. And what the permit says as far as the company goes on, it doesn't matter. The TA permit number matches the lease number, which matches the car. So I don't, what company it says on the permit, I don't think would matter. He would need to have the independent contractor sticker because he's driving as an independent contractor. If it has an employee medallion on the side of it, then everything else has to match. He has to have his TA card has to say Desert Cab on it because he's an employee of Desert Cab. The only issue I can see that would be, and again, I'm not on their side. The only issue I could see for them would be is the TA has somebody called in and said, I was in a cab yesterday. I don't remember what the cab company was, but the guy's name was George Balaban. And he did some really bad stuff. And now Carl, administrator, is thinking, where does George work? Well, they look and they go, George is an independent contractor. We don't know where he's working. So it's going to be hard to go find him, to get him, because we don't know where he's leasing from.
But couldn't I solve that for when I give them the sticker, they have to tell me what company?
Currently, when you get the independent contractor sticker, I can go lease from anybody. I can lease from Desert on Monday. And so it doesn't say that. Now, the leases we do have to turn into that has the name on it. So you could look through the leases that get sent to you to go find out where I'm at.
If we index them, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I just also throw out that the driver is a licensee of the agency, so you could also ask the driver and they're obligated to answer you. So if you can't find it in TA records, you have the the regulatory authority to interview the driver and find out.
Well, and you would be able to look up George Balaban in your system and you would know what my address is. I mean, when I applied for the TA card, I'm sure you're getting all kinds of information from me, my phone number, my address, everything. So you might not be able to go find me at the cab company that I worked at, but you know my address, you know who I am and where I am. And
It's hard for me to imagine stopping a cab as an enforcement officer of the TA and not being able to figure out who the driver is or who owns the cab. That's hard for me. I believe the administrator when he says there's an issue, but I think maybe if I would just ask the administrator to be maybe a little bit more specific as to what the problem is, the size of the problem, whether this is.
I guess one of the things that would happen, like for example, one of the things that we also do is our dispatch does get complaints from individuals. So to a certain extent, some of those complaints are specific. Some of those complaints are general, as George states. So to a certain extent, in terms of being able to search back what you're talking about, at this particular point, the way the lease situation works in the TA is that we only approve the language within your contracts on a 6-month basis. We do not approve specific contracts in terms of what's happening. Whatever's in those contracts, I have no control over what you put in your contract relative to any lease driver. So I don't have a database to go back to in order to backtrack that information that you're talking about, because to a certain extent, the individual contract for the individual driver would be what the information would be. But if a TA officer, for example, is not making a stop relative to that situation and is trying to do an investigative situation, there's no way to go back in terms of finding that information as to whether that person was a lease driver, employee driver, except to go to whatever their TA permit says, what they're supposed to be at any particular time.
So in part, the policies solve for a data problem.
Yes, because we created a situation in which, since we do not index those contracts, as you say, and we don't require the companies to submit those contracts to us in terms of for individual drivers, and we only require them to be in the vehicle when the driver is driving lease, that would be the only time in which, if there was something that happened at that particular point in time, we'd know something. But if it was something that happened after the fact, there would be no way for us to know whether someone is a lease driver or not a lease driver relative to that situation based upon our data that we collect at this particular point in time.
but you could very easily, while there's 16 cab companies, there's 5 operations. You could very easily send a blast email to the 5. This person and this TA number, does he lease from you? because he could lease for multiple people, and our response will be yes or no, he leases there. So it's, again, it's not like they're trying to find him, you know, across a million different places where he's at. It's not hard to find a person. If the PA officer's looking for him, you just basically call the company, does this guy work for you? Or send an email, does this guy work for you? Here's his TA number. And I mean, we're all 24/7 operations. This is not rocket science. And I think what we're trying to do is cause more downsides than for the rare instances that they need it.
And in the end, I would add that it could be easily perceived that we're penalizing the drivers for that.
For sure.
Is your comment on this very
Yes.
subject? Okay.
Yes, Desiree, on behalf of Lucky and Western, we are required at the end of every month to submit a list of all current lease drivers for that month. So there is kind of a checks and balance. Every month we submit it. These are all the people currently leasing for us for this month.
You've been patient.
Thank you
If
for
there's,
the,
are there any questions before? Thank you.
thank you for the record, Kimberly Maxon Rushton with the law firm Cooper Levinson, appearing on behalf of the Delivery Operators Association. So the standard relative to the independent contractors and the driver employees is not new. It's been in place with the NTA for decades. And so in 2015, with the entrance of the TNCs, that's where we put into place the ability for the drivers to serve as both an employee driver as well as an independent contract driver. And if you go back and look at the legislative history, you'll see a record whereby the objective is to give the drivers the flexibility as independent contractors. It was to allow them to work for any company at any time as they see fit. And so the intention of having both Desiree and George present today was to give you and the administrator the assurance that the standards relative to safety aren't compromised simply because you have an independent contractor driver. They have to abide by the same rules as the carriers. And as George and Desiree have pointed out, and as I spoke to Cheryl Knapp on behalf of the Bell companies, they all have the meters that trigger after 12 hours. They also have the meetings with their drivers if they see that on a regular basis. So I think it's important to note the fact that this was a model that was in place before 2015 when the legislation changed specific to the TA.
Was it the TA or the NTA? Because you
It was
kind of mixing metaphors, because I don't think the TA statutes were changed, well, the NTA statutes were changed. And are we mixing metaphors here in terms of what applies to the TA versus what applies to the NTA? That's the question.
So the NTA, relative to their oversight of taxi operations external to Clark County, has always had the driver, employee, independent contractor. So in 2015, on behalf of the industry, we went forward and asked for the same accommodation here at the Nevada Taxicab Authority for the operators in Clark County. We further expanded that in 2017 to allow for taxi operators to also service TNC drivers. That is a business decision relative to the TNCs. So while we've attempted and drivers have expressed an interest in serving as both a taxi driver as well as a TNC, the TNCs just haven't allowed that. So again, but I will say that what's also very important is the really robust regulatory scheme that you have in front of you specific to the drivers and the independent contractors. So following the passage of the law in 2015, we held, I would say, lengthy workshops to discuss this very issue, how we could give the TA the assurance that the drivers were being trained relative to their hours of service, how the TA could be assured that the vehicles at all times would be safe, because that was the responsibility of the carriers, and how we balance that between being an employer and being one that contracts with an independent contractor. And so in addition to this body and the Attorney General's office, we also have the Labor Commissioner come and opine on this. And so I would say that I really think you have a very good regulatory scheme that addresses all of these issues and impresses upon the carriers that their safety responsibilities do not waver simply because of the fact that it's an independent contractor. But, and so that's why you have the daily inspections and then all of the recordation that is maintained. Anything other than that that is needed by the TA can certainly be provided, but prohibiting drivers from serving as both an employee driver and an independent contract driver, I would respectfully submit is not consistent with the law and not what our intent was, but something we can certainly work through with the TA to give the board and the administrator the assurance you need that the drivers are operating safely and that those vehicles are being maintained at all times safely. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yep, thank you. I have no questions of the panel. I do have questions. Mr. Armstrong, just my knowledge, they have two types of driver licenses.
That's correct.
Is the standard of review or the requirements any different for either?
No.
No. So why do we have different categories? What's the policy on that?
Policy on that is that when a driver comes in to get a license, they either are a lease driver or they're an employee driver. They have to either provide a copy of their lease if they are a lease driver to apply for a permit, or they have to provide an employment referral letter in order to get a permit in order to be an employee driver. The requirements for each driver are the same in terms of what we're talking about in terms of being a driver. But my concern is knowing exactly who is where, when they need to be, so that I can provide that information both to the traveling public as well as to my officers to make sure that we don't make mistakes relative to whether someone is properly driving for a particular individual. That was the concern that I was attempting to address with the two policies that we're talking about. It's not to say that I am not willing to look at these policies in terms of seeing as to whether there is a better way to carve this thing, but I still want that assurance that I know who's driving what at what time. That's something that I think that we as an agency have a right to have, and that's something that we need to be able to do at any one time. It creates a problem also exists in terms of, I understand that drivers want some level of flexibility, but at the same time, we have a situation in which a driver is operating on two different lease contracts. There may be a question that may exist in terms of, like we talked about, the 12-hour days and the 70 hours per week kind of situation, in terms of whether those statutes would be in conflict, because the two companies would not know. If you're leasing from two companies or you're an employee of one company versus leasing another company, they would not know each other's liability situation relative to the situation. They would not know because there is no requirement, both within our statutes or the NACs that specifically state that you, by the way, have to let the TA know or let your employer know that you're asking for a lease contract at that particular point in terms of the choice that you're talking about you're making at this particular point. So maybe one of the things that may have to happen is that all parties be made aware when someone is asking for multiple situations, and as such, so that everyone is aware and has noticed that this is the situation with this particular driver. And that's something that we may need to look into in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with these regs, and maybe I need to fine tune these regs based upon those issues.
Okay, but I guess,
No, go ahead and.
Go
ask
ahead,
your-
'cause you went way ahead of me there, and I don't disagree with what you said. I'm still trying to get my arms around why we have two licenses that are exactly the same. And I just don't understand why, as a regulatory agency, we would do that. I could understand a public policy that we would make a higher standard for a lease driver, because there's a certain higher level of responsibility and trust on that, but we don't. So essentially, it's a driver. But when they walk in the door, depending on what they have in their hand, a referral letter or a lease, we herd them into a different license that is really indistinguishable from a public policy perspective. So before we even get to these policies that we're discussing, I don't understand why we have two different licenses and why a driver would be pigeonholed into one based on what their situation was the first day they walked into the door. I get some of the other things we've talked about, and I think there's more discussion that needs to be had, but I could understand if I walk in saying I'm going to be a driver for Yellow Cab and their affiliated companies, maybe there's an argument that that's who they should be with, lease or an employee, but I don't understand why we have two different categories of driver. When from what you're telling me, there's really no need to have them. They're a driver. And how they wind up driving, what their business arrangement is basically between them and their company. And the only way we distinguish it is what piece of paper they walked into our office with.
And I guess the thing that I would say to that is that I need to know at any particular time who you are with.
Correct.
So that I can give that information out, as you say,
Right.
to my enforcement staff, to my dispatch staff, and things of that nature. The question is, what is the correct mechanism in order for me to accomplish that goal? Maybe it may have been Regulation 311 and 312 may have been a clumsy way of attempting to do that, but it was a situation in terms of trying to get that button down so that we know at any particular time who exactly are you working for? Are you working as a lease driver for Whittlesey? Are you working as a deluxe driver employee? We need to know at any particular time exactly what contract or what employment.
I'm going to cut
situation
you off
we're in.
because I understand that.
Okay.
But the fact, again, in my hypothetical, if I walk in with the document from Whittlesey or one of their affiliate companies, what we're saying is the license the driver gets is, even though there's no difference in any of the regulatory requirements, our standard of review, their qualifications, what we charge them, it just so happens the name on the heading of the document pigeonholes them from employee driver to lease driver. And yet we have no regulatory policy that there should be a distinction. Now, I get to the second part of your saying is if it says Whittlesey on there, you need to know they work for Whittlesey or an affiliated company. But it doesn't really matter from what you're telling me whether they're a lease driver or an employee driver. So I just don't understand why we would have two separate types of licenses when there's no difference in the policy. You were going to weigh in on this.
The Mario LaCascia Deluxe Taxi, that was created way before you guys got here, like 3-4 years ago, because we don't lease. So what was happening is I would have a guy that had my company name on the permit, I'd go somewhere and lease. That's why it was created.
Which would be a violation because
Well, they were
did
doing
not-
it. They were doing it.
Yeah, well, that would be a
That's what
violation
created
because
that.
now they've got a different company. From what the
Everything else is
administrator's
okay.
telling me, it has long been the policy of the agency that if you're a driver for a company, you at least need to notify us if you're going to another company.
That's correct.
But I'm still back in the beginning here. Why do we have two different types of licenses? We should have a driver license, or we should make the policy that lease drivers have a higher standard and higher requirements because there's a higher level of trust with them. And I don't,
Well, that was the.
we
permit.
opened up the Pandora's
Permit
box
was
on
created
leasing
'cause there was 3 or
before I
4
got
back then. I think we're the only ones left.
I would have voted against it, but I wasn't here.
No, that's why
I
it was
remember the
created.
problems with lease
There's 3
drivers when I was
I
at the.
believe it was
NTA.
us, Nellis, and there was some other company, but now I think us and Nellis are the only who left. That's why it was created.
Okay, so then we get to the issue, and I know we have other questions. We get to the issue of these policies.
Right.
Now that I understand that, quite frankly, we're doing something that we don't need to do before we get to this. Now we get the question of these things, and now I think the administrator has explained it to me to my satisfaction, and I kind of agree that he needs to maybe go back and have more discussions with industry so he can meet his regulatory requirements. But I'll waive the floor now. I know there's other questions and comments.
To part of the response you gave, Member Soderberg, you talked about who has liability, but I want to make sure I'm understanding that statement. You're talking about between the companies, because there is no liability to the state of Nevada.
No, it will be between the companies as to who ultimately be responsible.
And do I,
Also, there may be a possibility in terms of that situation too, because if a citation has to be written, let's say it's a situation in which it's a joint situation in which both the company would be liable for something to the agency in terms of a violation of a regulatory situation, then we would have to find both of them in terms of both the driver as well as the company based upon a violation of TA policy. We need to know what company that is.
In the joint regulatory liability scenario, can't I just write them both up and they can show up in front of the hearing officer? and
We
duke it
could.
out?
We could.
And in the civil liability standpoint,
Everybody gets sued.
yeah. And to quote a school teacher friend of mine, not my monkey, not my circus, right? So as long as I can jointly cite them and bring them in front of a hearing officer and they can duke it out as to who's responsible for the regulatory violation, and in most cases, they're both going to get whacked, then in the civil liability, if the industry's happy bearing that responsibility and or ambiguity, that's part of what they do. They're in business. So I'm not sure the liability issue. I am with Member Soderberg. There sounds like there's an information need. Before I yield the floor to Member Decker, you called these, and I think just inadvertently, regulations.
They're not regulations, they are policies.
And I will just voice as whatever the result is. I am not concerned that you issued the policies. That's your prerogative. I am a bit concerned that the policies to achieve what you're trying to achieve, the policies may be rules of general applicability on a different subject matter that we might find ourselves have done an ultra virus act agency that this should have been done through a rulemaking, some aspect of it. I think when you start saying drivers can only be vanilla or chocolate, we probably have to go through a rulemaking. I'm not sure we can do that. And I'm not trying to lawyer for the agency. I'm just saying, when I read these, that was one of the questions I had is, did we analyze, and I think we need to analyze whether we, under the PUC versus old Nevada Power case, whether we need to do part of this through a rulemaking. But in any event, I tend to agree with Member Soderberg that we maybe need to revisit these and figure out if we've used a sledgehammer instead of a scalpel.
And I would agree in essence. I agree that you need to be able to identify a driver, who they're working for, who bears financial responsibility for their employment, who owns the car. I don't remember in my time as administrator that being an issue. I don't even remember it being in the top 50 issues. I believe you when you say it's an issue, but I'm concerned with the example you gave in which you said there may be a driver who leases multiple vehicles. And I'm not sure that happens. You pay $1,500 a week or whatever it costs now to lease a vehicle. You can only drive one vehicle at a time and you can only drive so many hours. I'm not sure there are people that lease more than one vehicle and that presents the problem that you're addressing. So I don't think, I personally, as a regulator at another agency and as a member of this board, I don't speak on behalf of the board, but I don't support limiting the driver's ability to have options in an environment in which there are a lot of options for the competition, PNCs, other professional licensee types not related to transportation, possibly licensees of the NTA. I think to the extent that we can accommodate it, that we ought to be going the other direction and figuring out how to register permittees with whoever they'd like to be employed by. part-time here, part-time there, whatever they want, because I think that's the direction of, professional licensing in Nevada. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
No, I think we've said it all.
So this is just a discussion item. I think we've had a robust discussion and we leave it in your hands.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr.
If I could ask a point of clarification, for the record, Kimberly Maxon Rushton with the law firm Cooper Levinson. So the policies went into effect on December 7th. And right now, drivers aren't allowed to serve as both an employee and an independent contractor, whereas prior to December 7th, since 2016, they've been able to do that. Now we have CES coming up with the note in the paper yesterday of 100,000 plus attendees. We need to be able to have drivers and safe taxi vehicles providing that service. So based on the comments, could we respectfully request that the policies be suspended until we do circle back and have a workshop on this, and so that the drivers have clarification as to the fact that they can perform the same functions that they performed between 2016 and December of 2022.
So you certainly may make that request to the administrator, but under the open meeting law, I can't work.
I certainly understand. So we'll submit a request, but I do think it's important, especially right now, because of the fact that we do really want to have drivers during this peak season here in Las Vegas, especially. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further on agenda item 3? That'll take us to agenda item 4, which are staff reports.
Administrators report. Continue to the page dealing with industry statistics at this particular point for October and November 2022. It looks like our rides are again up in terms of increases. We had a small decrease, it looks like, in October with Nellis Cab as well as YCS New Cab 2, 4, and Star and Yellow. Revenue per trip was up in October between this year and past years. Our lease revenue per trip seems to be up too in terms of what we're talking about. The combined trip comparisons we've done in terms of October in 2021 is 1,305,439 trips in October of 2021 versus 1,379,031 trips in terms of October of 2022. So we are in a robust situation in terms of number of rides per month in terms of October. We still have a total of 3,530 lease medallions that have been authorized by the authority. There has not been an increase, nor has there been an application, with the exception of the independent cab application for additional medallions, but the medallion figure has stayed constant. Lease to cows, as was stated before, there are 5 companies that specifically deal with leasing at this point out of 16 companies. And there are a total of 1,051 companies that are authorized to do leases relative to the industry. In November of 2022, those statistics show basically that our monthly trips did increase between 21 and 22 in terms of most of our companies, with the exception of Nellis Cab, New Cab 2, New Cab 4, Star and Yellow, in terms of showing some decreases between November 21 in terms of total number of trips versus November of 2022. In terms of our employee revenue per trip, that revenue per trip pretty much has increased across the board relative to all the cab companies that we're talking about at this particular point. Lease revenue per trip is pretty much the same thing in terms of it has increased in November of 2022. Our monthly combined trip totals, we have increased between 21 and 22. We did 1,106,371 rides, trips in 2021 of November, and this November we did 1,142,950 rides. So we're doing pretty well in terms of the industry's health, in terms of what we're talking about as of this point. As stated before, we still pretty much have the same number of medallions, both lease medallions in November of 2022 as we have for lease medallions relative to lease medallions as well as regular medallions in terms of the cab companies that we have at this particular point. October 2022, in terms of investigations, we've had a total number of citations written of 110. One of the reasons why some of the citations may have increased between October and November is that we increased enforcement patrols. We added an additional shift for October of 2022 to operate between 6 p.m. and 2 a.m. We wanted to see if we could provide statistics relative to that information to provide to the legislature as to the need as to whether we needed to be out during those timeframes. We found that we had increased enforcement activity during that period of time, and we are at this point doing periodic situations because we don't have the pilot program going at this particular point, but we are doing periodic situations in terms of not knowing when, but random days in which we operate from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. in order to do that. And most of that is happening probably on weekends in terms of, because that's where we seem to be having a majority of our problems in terms of this time frame. We just needed to have data to make the determination as to whether or not it would be appropriate for us to both ask for money from the legislature relative to getting additional officers and adding an additional shift to our operations to cover that thing in order for us to be more of a 24-hour industry, because the problem that we had is that we have suffered large budget cuts as of this point because of the pandemic and because of the Uber and Lyft situation. But we have rebounded in terms of what is going on in terms of the number of cab rides that we're giving, as well as the number of conventions and people that are coming to town. And we're going to need probably an enhanced investigatory staff in order to deal with that from this point forward. So that is something that has been added to our legislative request for the budget for 24 and 25, and it will be dealt with the legislature as it comes into fruition in February of 2023. We also cut back on our number of UPT investigations between October and November because I was without a administrative attorney. We have just hired a new administrative attorney, Amy Perret, who is right there, that is also acting as the secretary of the board. So we are going to continue from this point forward. I have been handling the hearings for the agency between October and November before we hired Ms. Perret. I find that that is an additional task that I sometimes don't have the time to do with the other things that I have to do. So I am happy that we now have an administrative attorney that can deal with that matter full time. Another thing that I need to let the industry know is that we just did an order that moved the PAD 5 regulation in terms of the order this board ordered relative to gas surcharge. We moved it from this week level 2 to level 1. That will go into effect on Friday, and we've given additional time because we usually want people to have the time in order to be able to put out the correct rate cards relative to what tier we're on, relative to that board order. But that board order has gone out and will go into effect as of Friday, even though it was signed on Tuesday. Because I usually try to give some lead time for the companies in order to be able to update their information and also update the meters. My staff is aware of that situation and they are working toward that. We have a total at this particular point in terms of licensed drivers. We're talking both lease as well as employee drivers of 8,086 drivers as of this point. So we are doing pretty well in terms of the number of drivers that we are licensing up to this point. If the board has any questions or anyone else has any questions relative to the report, there's one other thing. Katina Martinez, who has been our MA2 for some years, is this will be her last board meeting. She will be moving on to Mr. Decker's operation in terms of DV. I am sad to see her go, but I will never be a person that stands in the way of anyone in terms of their professional development. We will miss her. She is not replaceable, but as in government, I have to find a replacement for her. So that is something that I want to thank her for all her effort, all her time, and her dedication to this industry, as well as her dedication to the department. And I would ask that the board, if they wish, to express their appreciation to Katana for all the things that she has done for them, as well as for this agency during the time that she's been here. And that would conclude my report.
This member Decker.
Guilty as charged.
Guilty. If it makes anybody feel any better, I hired her while I was Taxicab Authority Administrator, and I'm
Doesn't make me feel.
taking
like
her. But
Still a poacher.
she's getting a nice promotion, and it's hard to turn that down. She's going to earn it, but we'll be happy to have her as well. And she has done outstanding at the Taxicab Authority. And as a former administrator, board member, I appreciate that as well. I have a couple comments.
Yeah.
Number one, the administrator in 2019 turned in 17 enforcement officers. I hope you get them back in 2023. That would be a feat if you could pull that off, but if I can help in any way, I'd be happy to. It looks like Virgin Valley found its niche. They're up almost 44%. Is that attributed to anything specific that's not proprietary?
That would be Mr. That would be Mr. Ballotman as to answering that question. Not a question that I can answer.
We could wait to public comment. It was just, yeah. And I just want to point out to the board, the citation violation report. If you look at the spread of violations that are across the different category types, that says to me that your officers are out there looking for different things that affect the public, and they're not concentrating on one or a few violations, and they're doing a very good job. And I just want to point that out very quickly.
I have no questions. So both welcome and congratulations and bon voyage. I don't have any questions of the administrator. Any other items on our monthly reports?
No, that's it.
Hearing none, that will take us to public comment. Val, then you had public comment, Ms. Martinez.
So I was, to answer JD's question, let's kind of wrap this all up. Just overall for the industry. As we were talking earlier about, we continue to still need drivers. I mean, we're getting drivers into the industry without being unsafe. Anything and everything that the regulatory agency can do to make driving a cab a better job helps. So, whether you call it harassment, just being easier on the drivers is what we need, because we don't want to run drivers out of the industry as we're trying to gain them. September that passed was the busiest month ever in history for me. Then October became the busiest month ever in history for me. Now, November it was not, but it was the busiest November ever in history for me. We get into December, which is historically a very slow time. The weekend when the rodeo ended, the last day of the rodeo, that weekend, again, for my operation, was the fourth busiest weekend ever in history in December. I mean, it's crazy. So again, as many drivers as we can get in the industry and keep in the industry, whether they're employees, they're leasing, they're both, is good, because there are rides out there that we can provide service, and it's good, safe, regulated service, so that we want these people into the industry. Virgin Valley's numbers are, you go way back to when it was an operation at Prius, they were running a lot of companies, and I don't know the reasons, but they weren't doing a lot of rides. Then obviously COVID came, I mean, as Frias was on, ramping down, it shrank and shrank. COVID came. As I've taken it over, it has 132 medallions, but it only had 60 cars. So these numbers are going up because I'm just buying cars, converting cars, getting medallions on and getting drivers in it. So it's not anything specific that company's doing other than finally using its medallions. So it's not some big secret. It's just, I was able to source cars, which are very still difficult to get, buying onesies and twosies here, and then finding drivers to put in them, which again is just providing service to the public. And we could use more cars out there. But it obviously doesn't do any good unless there's a driver in it. So you got to source the car and you got to source the driver. And anything we can do to make that easier is going to be good for the industry in general. So that's all.
Appreciate that. That's good to know. Actually, yeah, that's more cars on the road. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez?
Ana Martinez from Taxicab Authority. My comment is regarding the the parking enforcement, ongoing parking enforcement issue. And really, the only question that I had wanted to ask, if possible, of the city of Las Vegas is if they would be able to provide any kind of the agency or provide Taxicab Authority some kind of data from the last 2 years of the type of the citation tickets that are given out to like what those numbers would be. And then we would possibly just take a look at and see how many of those go out to taxi drivers versus,
MTAs
and yeah,
and private parties.
correct.
Right.
Yeah, and make that distinction
Not,
too.
not lost on us.
Sounds like a project.
Well, I think it's part of it.
But we can ask, we can ask those questions. I think that we have a relationship with them and we can get that information. It's just something that has to be compiled and presented to you guys.
We have to make sure there's not a selective enforcement
yes.
issue.
Oh, yes. Oh,
That
yes.
is, this is the easiest
Yes,
target.
yes. Especially, I don't want a dichotomy to exist between Uber and Lyft versus taxi cabs. That's something that I don't want to see happen.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Is there any other member of the public who is present wishes to address us? Is there any member of the public online that would like to make public comment?
No.
Seeing none, I will close our second public comment session and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned for the month.
Happy holidays to everyone.